Okay. So, hey there, folks. Um, for anybody who doesn't know me personally is watching this video, I teach animation, a couple different types of animation at Vancouver Film School, and a few of my students were commenting that it would be great if they had a video of me going through how to animate characters, so that if they don't remember something from my lecture, my class, then they can watch the video for reference. And I thought that was a really good idea, and I also thought I would put it on YouTube since I post a lot of animation on YouTube, and I've been doing a lot more behind the scenes stuff lately too because of my Twitch stream and stuff. So I'm going to do that. I'm basically going to I'm going to animate a walk cycle and walk you through it, and I'll try to cover stuff that I maybe wouldn't normally do in my animation lecture, so that for anybody who isn't from my class will kind of know what I'm referring to, so I'm not skipping over stuff, hopefully. The character I'm going to use here is Dr. Dana Stanley. He's from an animated movie I made called The Snot that Ate Port Harry. You can watch some trailers and more behind the scenes stuff from that on my channel as well. And hopefully the movie itself will be available to watch before too long. So one thing I'm going to mention, I'm going to copy and paste one of these angles into a new file. I'm going to do that, but one thing I'm going to mention is obviously, because this is from a full-length movie, you need to be visible from all different angles at one point or another. So he has a complete turnaround. I would recommend, if for anybody who is making a character like from scratch that they're going to animate, it's great if you're able to do a complete turnaround because then you have all that reference and everything, but it's not necessarily needed depending on what you're doing with the character, of course, because obviously if you know that the character's going to go through a lot, you're going to see a lot, then the more you have, the more freedom you have. But if you know what they're going to do and it's fairly minimal and you're only going to see them from one angle, then don't waste your time making the others. But if you can only make one angle, I would suggest doing this one. This is the 3/4 pose, and that is because it's the one that's used the most. It's the more visually interesting because you can see the face in its entirety. Unlike the profile, we're only seeing half the face, and they're not looking straight at the camera like they are in a front view. And this can you can kind of cheat this to work as a profile view if you need to, and you can kind of cheat this to work as a front view if you need to, sorry. I'm going to use the profile because the walk cycle kind of works easiest when you're first learning it. It's kind of easiest to do it in profile, but you can still follow along and copy it pretty closely with 3/4 view if that's what you have to work with. But I'm going to use this version of Dana here. So I'm going to just grab and click on Control-C to copy, just like most programs. You can also go Edit Copy, of course. And I'm going to make a new file that I'm going to do my animation in. So File New. Also, by the way, I haven't updated my Adobe Animate in a while. I don't know how many versions behind I am. I just haven't kind of gotten around to it. I haven't, at home on my own computer, since I finished this, I haven't done a ton of animation, although I'm going to be doing something pretty soon. I might even make some more tutorials while I'm doing that. So maybe when I do that, I'll update, but I haven't done that yet. So if your interface is looking slightly different than mine, that's probably why, but it's pretty negligible, the difference. I have used the newer one. That's what we have at the school, and yeah, you're not really missing much if your timeline or your interface isn't looking exactly the same. So anyway, I'm choosing ActionScript 3. Even though I'm not doing any type of coding, ActionScript 3 is just better for animation, in my opinion. If for no other reason that when you export it to do a kind of test render to watch your animation, it gives you a little preview window in an SWF file. If you're using anything else, it's going to try to render it in a browser for it, which I guess if it's just a test before you do a proper export at the end, then I guess it doesn't really matter, but I like it better anyway myself. So anyway, so I copied Dana already. I'm just going to paste him in here, Control-V. So there he is. And let's go ahead and label the layer here. I'm not really going to have anything more than one layer, so it's not that big of a deal. But It's a good habit to be in for organizational purposes. And I can resize him later, of course, but I'll try to keep him in the white because it might be a little bit easier for you guys to see. And one thing I should point out as well as a reminder for anybody who is pretty new to this. So you'll see this is all one symbol. It's got a blue rounding box around it, and there's that center point. And that's because it's a symbol. That's what it looks like. Look at the properties over here. That's the icon for it. You see it's graphic. Always choose graphic when you're doing just regular animation for TV or film. Buttons and movie clips are meant purely for interactive stuff, so we try to stay away from them. They can be problematic when we're not actually using them for the reasons they're meant to, but graphic is always good. I'm going to double click on him, and you can see up here now inside of Dana's comp. And inside of him, he's got a bunch of layers. And each one of those layers is a different symbol. It's all of his different body parts, basically. And, excuse me. All of these different symbols need to be on separate layers in order for them to work. Out here on our main timeline, we want it to only be one symbol. It makes things easier to deal with. We can resize him if we want to, and all the animation is going to go with it. We don't need to worry about selecting all the keyframes all at once, because that can be a pain in the ass and leads to all kinds of problems and stuff. So just easier, and I'm going to do something else a little bit later that is only doable when you have it set up like this, with everything inside of one symbol. So you're going to double click. Again, just another example too, his head is all one piece. If I double click on that, you'll see his head is all broken up into different pieces as well. That is so that I can animate his whole body moving around, his head bobbing up and everything like that. And then I can double click on his head, and inside I can animate his eyes blinking, mouth moving, and all that kind of stuff. You'll notice actually too in here, because he's being used for a feature, or was used for a feature, I already have a pre-made eye blink for myself and an eye squint. And I did that for all my characters so that when I was going from shot to shot, some of the stuff that was going to be happening regularly, I would always have it there available so I didn't have to animate from scratch every time. Just a bit of a time saver for myself. So, and one more thing I'll mention before I animate. When you combine everything into a symbol, initially everything inside is going to be on one layer. But if you select it all, you right click, and you go distribute to layers, it'll put it all on separate layers for you. And every layer will get named after the symbol. And also you want to make sure that everything is for sure a symbol before you start animating it. The best way to test that is to select everything like I just did. If it has a blue box around it, it's a symbol. If it's not a symbol, it's going to look more like this. I'll just unsymbolize this just so you can see. It'll look more like that. So if you select everything and one of your pieces looks like that, then select that and convert it to a symbol. You can convert it by hitting F8 is the hotkey. So that's F8, I just said. Or right click on it and go convert to symbol. That'll work as well. But I'm just going to undo that, put them back to normal. And the one last thing you need to do before you can actually animate them is with the transform tool, click on an individual symbol, and by default this pivot point is going to be in the middle, so when you go to rotate it'll do that. But we want it to, just like a bone would work, we want it to pivot off of his shoulder. So make sure that you put all of those in the right place before you start animating. If you don't do that, if you leave one of the anchor points in the center, and then you're animating and you realize that's not really working for you and you move it, when you add your tweens later on, it's going to go really buggy on you. It's going to it's not going to work. The reason is that Animate uses that center point to figure out the digital geography of that symbol. And so if that moves from one place to another mid-animation, it just basically just confuses the shit out of the whole thing. So it just goes wonky on you. So try to avoid that as much as possible. But if you lock it down in the first place, then it's not really a problem. So just a quick rundown of how the animation works. We have all of our keyframes here. Our first keyframe, we always start with a keyframe, we always get that for free. And it's all in different layers. So if I want to animate them, I'm going to select all of the layers at the point where I want a new pose to happen. And I'm going to add a keyframe there. One thing to note, and this might sound obvious, but it's actually easy to screw this up. is when you're selecting multiple layers like that, click and drag, don't let go of the mouse until you have the area selected that you want. Something that people do a lot is they click once, and then they click again to move it. And when you do that, you're not selecting more, you're actually just moving that frame. And when you do that, you're basically moving a keyframe version of that to another layer, and it just screws stuff up, as you can see. We just lost his head there. So again, I'm going to click and not let go until I have everything I want selected, and I'm going to hit F6. And to animate, just for example, if I want to move his arm, I'm going to select all three of these parts of his arm. I'm going to hold Shift to select all three. When you have more than one thing selected, you can freely move the anchor point, because that is not attached to any symbol's geography. That's just a temporary thing there. So I can move that. Then I can deselect here, move it to the elbow to bend him at the elbow, and adjust if I need to. And then I can deselect by holding Shift, clicking again, and move the hand. The hand is only one symbol, so I don't want to move the anchor point, but if I locked it down first, like I said, then it's not really a problem. And now that I've done that, I can go back here, select in the middle, right click, create class between. And it goes. Okay? Looks like he's scratching his ass. That was an accident, but why not? It's funny. Also, I'll note, we're not really going to do this with the walk cycle, but I will note that when you select the tweens, then over in the properties you have ease. And if you go to a positive number, it says out, that means it eases out. So it starts a little bit faster and it slows down at the end. Or if you go to a negative number, it says in, that's because it eases in. So it starts slower and then it speeds up. For a walk cycle, we kind of want all of our parts to be moving at a consistent rate from beginning to end, so we're not really going to mess with that. But for other animation, that's used quite a bit. So bear that in mind for future reference. Also, one thing that is different in the newer version of Animate, by the way, is the color of the tweens looks a little bit different. I think it's a green? Or no, it's purple, so it is. Yeah. So I'm going to remove that, and we're going to start doing this actual walk cycle. Now, there's lots of walk cycle references you can find online, and you can just copy those key poses onto the timeline as you'd like. I'm just going to do one without reference because I've done this plenty of times. So I'm just going to start. I'll explain what these poses are as I go. So we're going to have one leg out for this first pose, and this other leg is going to go back. We're going to bend him at the knee. So it's kind of like his heel is planted here and his toe is planted back here. Ideally, for a character with feet this big, you would actually probably divide his foot into two parts so you can kind of bend him at the toe. It just so happens, in the case of Dana here, that you never really get a close-up look at his feet or anything when he's walking in profile. It's usually really wide when that's the case, or it's close and it's cropped and you don't see the feet, so it was never really a concern with this character. But for other characters it might be. Anyway, so I'm going to move his arm now. Another thing with walks is when a person walks, their arms always swing opposite of their legs. So if his right leg is forward, which it is, then his right arm is going to be back. And the opposite, well, I guess technically the same is true of the other arm. So this leg is back, so that arm's going to be forward. Now we can't see that arm, but it is here somewhere. We find it down here. I can just select it from there. And we'll just rotate it. Also, sorry if you're hearing some weird noises, me coughing and stuff. I was just outside in the cold, and my nose is a little stuffed up. Power through that though, hopefully. So anyway, so there's pose number one. Now, because we're doing a cycle, we're going to reuse this pose. We want this to appear on frame 1, and we want it to appear on frame 20. So before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and add a keyframe on frame 20. So I select it all, and I hit F6. So there we go, 2 poses already done, all in one shot. This is called a contact pose, by the way, because that's when the foot first makes contact with the ground. So let's do the next contact pose. So basically the other stride. So I'm going to go right in the middle, frame 10, hit F6, add a keyframe. You can also go right click, insert keyframe, or convert to keyframes, by the way, but F16. And now we're going to do the exact opposite. So I'm going to take this leg and I'm going to rotate it back this way. So that basically that foot lands more or less in the same spot as the other one. It doesn't need to be 100% bang on, but you want it to be relatively close. Something like that. And I want the other leg to go out where that leg was. I can't see that anymore, though, but I can find that by clicking down here, the onion skin. In the newer version of Animate, it's up here somewhere. And let's grab the other leg. Now here's another trick to grabbing something you can't see. Select everything and just deselect the stuff in front that you don't need. So again, I can temporarily move the anchor point because I have more than one thing picked. And then I hold shift to deselect, move it to bend at the knee, shift to deselect, move the foot, but don't move the anchor point when it's only one. I'm going to move this whole thing a bit back because I went a little too far with it, like that. And now the arms are going to go opposite. We do swing our arms in real life. We don't necessarily swing them quite this much. So you can be pretty subtle with this, but if they're going to move even subtly, they should still be going opposite the legs, like I said earlier. Something like that. Alright, so we got 2 complete strides now. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a tween. So I'm going to select everything. I don't need to select every frame, I just need a little bit on this side and a little bit on this side so I can do it all at once. And then right click, create classic tween. And there it is. Now, to start off with, this is a pretty shitty walk. But it's a start, right? We have some fixing to do for sure, but it's starting to happen. And the reason we added the tween first is because it's finding us our halfway point between our 2 extreme poses. So I'm going to tweak it, but it's got some of the work already done for us. So I'm going to go ahead and add a keyframe on frame 5. And now it planted on this foot. So as he's moving, that foot is planted on the ground, that leg straightens up, so everything is going to rise up on that foot. So I'm going to select everything but that foot. So I just selected everything, I held shift to deselect, and I'm just using the arrow key on the keyboard to shift them up. So it gets an up. And even just adding that makes it feel slightly more natural. This is called a passing pose when we do this. So now this leg, the other leg behind, is passing that leg in front. That's why it's called the passing pose. So I'm going to bend at the knee, bring it a little bit more forward, so it's kind of leading a bit more, and drag it behind, so the lower leg and the foot is kind of going behind a little bit. It's already looking more walk-like, for sure. There's some weirdness going on with this foot, but we'll worry about that later. We can also add a bit of drag to the arms if we want. So we can grab this. This arm is swinging forward, so we're going to drag it behind a little bit at the forearm and the hand. It just makes it feel a little bit more loose, a little bit more real. I'll do the opposite with this one too. And while we're at it, we can take this take this head and rotate it down a little bit. Don't go too crazy or it's going to look like he's nodding. But having it go down a little bit while he walks is helpful. So let's do that again on frame 15, but with the opposite arms and legs. So we're going to add a keyframe. So now he's planted on the opposite foot. So now he's lifting up on that foot. So we're going to grab everything except for the planted foot. So grab it all, shift to deselect, shift everything up with the arrow key. And now this is the leg that's passing, so we're going to lead it forward with it a bit, but we're going to drag it, the lower leg and that foot. Like that. And let's add some drag to the arms again. So now the arms swing in the opposite direction, so it's going to drag this way. And this one's going to drag the other way. Oh, let's forgot to rotate his head, or as I called it a second ago, a foot for some reason. There we go. So now he's going. There are some issues that we can find. Also, if you want to export it, let's see what happens here. If I hit Control-Enter, it'll export. But it's not actually working. That is because we have 20 frames of animation here. But when we export, we're actually referencing this main timeline where he's only one symbol. And out here we only have one frame. So we need to extend this out. I'm going to put it out to 19. Now when I hit Control Enter, we can see him walk. It's a pretty fast walk. The reason I went to 19 and not 20 is because frame 20 is a repeat of frame 1. And we don't want that to be visible in our loop, or it's going to throw off the animation. It's going to hold for a little bit too long in that pose. So we'll address that later, but for now it's fine. If you do want to slow things down, you can just select a frame on all the layers in between two keyframes and hit F5 to extend it out. If you want to speed something up, right click and go remove frames. So basically the farther apart the keyframes are, the slower it's going to be, and the closer they are together, the faster it's going to be. So let's fix some of these little issues here that we notice with the feet. I'm going to zoom in a bit, and if we go through, we can see, like right there, that's weird, right? The reason for that is that Animate wants to take the fastest possible route from point A to point B when it's doing this stuff. And that isn't always following the arc that you want. So the first step to try to fix that is just double check your keyframes. You can see here, this is kind of sticking out here. I'm going to cheat that a bit because it shouldn't be sticking up underneath his foot. I'm just going to skew it. Now sometimes doing that solves your problem right there. Didn't fully solve it, but it did improve it for sure. If that doesn't work, go kind of in the middle of your keyframes, click this, and drag this into place. Once you've done that, the other spaces on the sides might be greatly improved. It might look way better. It might look completely back to normal, or it might be wonky and you have to do it again. On occasion, things will get so weird that you might need to like do it on every single frame, which is a pain in the ass, but it also goes pretty quick. That should always be the last step that you do though, because once you start messing with that, it's a lot harder to tweak your timing in ways that you might want. So I'm just gonna keep going through. You can get away with some of this stuff, like it's not always gonna really stand out to the audience. At an animation studio though, somebody will go through frame by frame and check for that. They usually refer to them as broken joints, so keep your eye out for that. And just know what could happen. So if I were to get pickier, I could probably find some other issues, but at first glance he's not looking too bad. Those giant feet are pretty stiff, so it would be nice if we had them split in half, but that's okay. And now when I export it, again, we can watch it again. It's looking like a pretty decent walk. It's a fast walk, like I said, but it works. Why not? Another thing we can do is let's get his hair bobbing up and down. So this works by doing animation inside of animation. So I'm going to double click on his head. And we're going to imitate the timing of the walk inside of the head. So let's get rid of the squint. We don't need the squint. We'll keep the blink in there because why not? It's not hurting anything. So we actually have 21 frames out there. I slowed down that first segment a little bit, so we have 21 now. So I'm going to remove all this excess. And the only thing we need to mess with is this hair. So let's imitate all of the keyframes. So there's one on 21, there's one on 16, there's one on 10, and there's one on 6. The reason I know that is because I've done this lots of times. But you might need to go back and forth between these two so that you kind of know. Right? Now here's the way, this is called overlapping action when we do this. Now I know that on frame 6 he's up higher because his leg's straightened out. So I know that from frame 1 to frame 6 he's lifting up. So on his way up, I'm going to add a keyframe in the middle. I'm going to skew his hair down a little bit. I also know that from frame 6 to frame 11 he's going down. So mid-down action, I'm going to add a keyframe and skew his hair up a little bit. And then again, now he's going back up, so the hair is going to go down. And now he's going back down, so the hair is going to go up. And then I'm going to grab it all, right-click, create class. I suggest skewing it instead of rotating it, because skewing it kind of deforms it a little bit, rotating it makes it look very solid, and it's hair, so it really shouldn't look that solid. Also, sorry, I just did this, but I didn't say it. I put the ease all the way up to 100, because for the hair, it usually always looks better if you do that. So, going like that. Not too bad on its own, it's a little weird. We go out here though, we can see it happening. It's subtle, and it probably should be subtle, but it is there. Control Enter. There he goes. Let's close that. We're gonna do one more step. I'm gonna make Dana walk from outside the screen over here to outside the screen over here. So now here's the thing. I'm gonna do that on this main timeline, and I only have 19 frames here. And that is because after frame 19, he loops. And I don't want to see frame 20 because that's a repeat of frame 1 and it throws off our loop. But 19 frames is way too short for him to walk across the screen. It's going to be way too fast. So I need to get rid of frame 20 without screwing up our animation. So I'm going to go back inside of data. I can't just select this and delete it, because then this last bit of animation won't work, because the tween will only work if it knows where to go. So I'm going to select all the frames one in from the last and hit F6. Then I'm going to grab what's left, right click, remove frames, and now you can play through and you'll fall just short of repeating that. And now that I've done that, I can extend this out as long as I want, and it's going to loop, and it'll never repeat that frame. Oops. So now I can go to frame 1, move them over here, go to another frame, let's just say frame 10, I don't know, F6, and move them over here, and then right click, create class between, and there he goes. If it looked like he was moving too slow for the speed that his legs are moving, then I could speed it up by just grabbing this and moving it closer, or if the opposite was the case, I could slow it down by clicking and dragging it. Or again, I could click in the middle, hit F5, or I could grab a little bit, right click, remove frames. So there is, a basic pass of doing character animation in Adobe Animate, also known as Flash. One other note I do want to mention, if I go back inside of him here, is when I was doing his hair, it worked well for me, but something that you might encounter is you might find when you play it back, every time it hits a new keyframe, whatever animation you did inside the head might reset back to frame 1. And you can tell if that's happening by the click on the symbol, add a keyframe, and you go over to the properties, where over here it says looping, and it says first 1. That's referring to the frame inside of the symbol that we're looking at. And we're on frame 1, and we're looking at frame 1 of his internal head animation, so that makes sense. If we go here and we click on it, it says 5, which is actually wrong. So there's an opportunity to fix it here. So it's actually showing frame 5, it should be showing frame 6. And the reason for that is because I added a frame in the middle here when I was showing you how to slow it down. In your case, it might actually say frame 1, because if you do all this animation and there's nothing going on inside of the head yet, then Flash has nothing to reference other than frame 1, so it just all stays at frame 1. So even though you might have gone inside of it and extended it out, it doesn't know that because that hadn't happened yet. And the way to fix that is to just select all the tweens and check sync. I think in the newer version of Animate it says sync symbol, but it's the same thing. That will only work on tweens, so if you were to select everything and maybe accidentally select a frame that doesn't have a tween on it, the option won't be there. So if you're trying this and it's not showing up, just make sure that you are looking for it, and if it's not working, just double check that you didn't accidentally select something like that. So anyway, so we got it all working now. There he goes, Dr. Dana Stanley on his way to whatever. And hopefully that was a helpful video to learn a little bit about animation, or to refresh if you already know, or if you're from my class and you saw my lecture live and you're working at home and now you're like, shit, I have no idea what to do. Hopefully that helps. And yeah, so I'm gonna call it quits, and yeah, thanks for watching. Goodbye.